There is a fundamental difference between cheap flow and deep flow. And in today's world, we more emphasize cheap flow, which is short-term, artificial, focused on quantity, not quality. It's about more, not less. And it's about ultimately being busy, but not productive. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I'm an organizational psychologist. Please like this video. Please subscribe. The first thing we want to ultimately do is define what focus means. Often when we think about focus, we think about being deep in thought and we think about effort. But the problem is that effort alone doesn't necessarily make progress. You could put a lot of effort into something, but not really be learning anything. You want to actually define what focus is. I actually have a coach, and every week we have conversations, and one of the questions we ask is, what was your level of deep focus this week? And for a while, I defined focus by how long or how intensely I was actually doing something. But we redefined focus based on how much something had transformed that week, based on the last conversation. And so focus isn't really about the length of time you're doing something or the quantity or even the amount of effort. So this is a crucial distinction. Most people define focus by the amount of time and effort they put in, when a much better definition is how much progress you actually made over that period of time, say over a week. So true focus is about transformation and about progress, not about busyness. It's not about effort and about how much quantity of time you put in, but it's about how much true transformation and progress you made. And so when I was looking back on this week, having this conversation with my mentor, I actually gave myself a low score initially because this week I didn't feel like I was that focused. But the truth is I actually made massive changes. I had some really important conversations and really tweaked my situation and also removed a lot of things that didn't matter. And so as I was reporting my score to him, I actually gave him a low score. And he said, what are you talking about? Like, if you're describing the amount of change and progress this week, this is one of the biggest weeks I've seen from you. And so it's really important to define focus based on progress and transformation, not on effort and quantity of time spent. This brings up a fundamental distinction between cheap flow and deep flow. Deep flow means you're actually making change, you're making progress, and you're moving forward in the direction you want to go, whereas cheap flow can be spent on quantity. And you might be doing 50 things and reward yourself for effort, and you may reward yourself for the amount of time you spent. But there's a massive difference between time spent and progress. And so the first step of having extreme focus is actually defining focus in a way that's going to move your life forward rather than keeping you on the hamster wheel. Step number 2 of having extreme focus on command, and this fits with number 1, is focus on quality, not quantity. If you're focused on quantity, then you're likely focused on time, effort, energy, and doing more and more and more. Whereas if you're focused on quality, then you're actually thinking about a transformation. You're thinking about what you're ultimately striving to become. This highlights a difference between how Microsoft operates and how Apple operates. Microsoft, for a long time, was heavily focused on competing against Apple. Microsoft was trying to create a better iPod than Apple, and they created what was called the Zune. But then shortly thereafter, Apple created the iPhone, which completely rendered iPods and Zunes and all of those types of things irrelevant because they went for quality, and quality means a transformation has occurred. Rather than trying to crawl faster, they shifted from crawling to walking, and walking is a totally different space. If you want to have deep flow, that means you're actually doing deep work and you're experiencing deep transformation and you're solving much bigger problems. You're solving problems you ultimately want to solve rather than reacting and competing with other people. This brings us to the third way that you can have extreme focus on command, and that's focusing on much bigger fish. In the book, Catching the Big Fish, David Lynch talks about how our consciousness and our creativity are like the ocean. If you're up at the surface, then all you can see is small fish. And those small fish represent your consciousness. They represent what you're focused on. Whatever you focus on expands. Whatever you focus on, you create more of. Whatever you filter is what you ultimately become. And if you're up at the surface, meaning you're doing many, many things at a mediocre level, whereas if you go really, really deep and you start focusing on bigger problems, you start striving to catch bigger fish, then you will have much bigger transformations. And so if you want to have massive focus on command, this goes back to progress and transformation and quality over quantity. It comes down to the size of the goal that you're going for, the size of the problem you're solving, the size of the vision that you're going for. This goes into a lot of the research on the difference between SMART goals and impossible goals. And some of my favorite new insight from Dr. Alan Bernard, who studies constraint theory, is that when you start going for goals that are impossible, then you have to start questioning your assumptions. This actually goes into a lot of what Elon Musk talks about. Elon Musk talks a lot about how when you go for something impossible, you have to stop operating with conventional thinking. This is the conventional thinking of your own self. You have to stop operating from your own past assumptions. You also have to stop operating from the assumptions of other people. You start questioning assumptions And then that leads you to start removing things. You start removing assumptions. You start removing things that you thought were required. You start removing friction. And so when you start going for something that's impossible and you set up your own impossible journey, then you're going to stop having the assumptions of your past self. And you're going to start looking for and becoming a lot more curious about finding new ways to succeed. This is how you will start transforming. This also highlights a massive difference between deliberate practice and habits. There's a lot of talk in the self-development world on habits, but if you actually study the science of deliberate practice is the opposite of habits. Deliberate practice is the combating of habits. If you're doing something habitually, that means you're not getting any better at it. You're actually doing it on autopilot. So if you are truly deliberately practicing, then that means you are going outside of your habits and you're studying yourself and you're doing stuff different than how you habitually do things. And even a day of true deliberate practice is going to get you way further than a year or even a lifetime of just being in your habits. So number 3 is about focusing on much bigger fish and going deeper rather than shallow. This takes us to the number 4th way to have extreme focus on command, and that is about removing friction rather than adding things. Cheap flow is about adding things. Cheap flow is about more and quantity, whereas deep flow is about quality. The first step before you add more is actually to start removing things. You want to remove all sorts of friction. That friction is both internal and external. And that internal friction is anything that's stopping you from going really, really deep on what you want. One of the most important ways to remove internal friction is to start being a lot more honest with yourself. One of my favorite quotes is, "All progress starts by telling the truth." There's another really important quote from Robert Brault. He said, "We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals." So there is all sorts of friction in your life by pursuing way too many things. And so you've got to remove those things. I love the book, The One Thing, where Gary Keller says, focus on doing fewer things for great effect rather than doing many things with side effects. Often you're trying to do too many things. And the reason you're trying to do too many things is because you're competing with others or you're not questioning assumptions. You're doing what you think other people are doing or what you think must be done. This, for example, is posting on every social media platform rather than focusing on one or two. You also want to remove external pressure. This could be the demands or requirements that are placed upon you. This takes a lot of courage to renegotiate your situation or even to remove many of the goals or things you're pursuing that are keeping you broad and not focused. The 5th and final way to create extreme focus on command is to be measured rather than unmeasured. Cheap flow means you're not really measured. You're just doing a lot of things, but you're not actually measuring your progress. You're not removing the stuff that doesn't matter. Whereas if you want deep flow, you are actually measuring your progress. One of my favorite economic laws is the idea of Pearson's law, which is that which is measured improves. That which is measured and reported improves exponentially. But this goes to the very point of the first one, which is how are you defining focus? What you measure, you manage. And so you want to measure meaningful progress in the few things that matter to you. And so one of the things that's helped me increase my focus massively and helped my team increase our focus is measuring and reporting key metrics every single week and just seeing our progress, seeing how we're making progress. It's not about time and effort. It's about genuine progress, and that progress must be measured and reported. And so if you're measuring and reporting key progress regularly, and then you're making adjustments based on the progress you're making, that's what deliberate practice is. So cheap flow is unmeasured. It's about doing 100 things, but ultimately being undiscerning about which ones matter. Whereas deep flow is about focused on the few things that do matter, catching much bigger fish, focusing on quality, not quantity, focusing on progress and transformation rather than focused on effort and time. And you can do that by genuinely measuring the few things that matter. As you measure your progress every single week and then make new plans each week to make truly meaningful progress, and as you strip more and more away, more internal friction, more external friction, as you remove lesser goals, meaning as you remove things that you thought were important, things that you thought you should do, and removing more and more things, then you will make massive progress. This gets to the final point I want to make, which is the concept of commitment. Commitment and focus go heavily together, and you can know what you're committed to largely by what you say no to. One of the things that Steve Jobs said when talking about Apple is he said that he was just as proud of the things that they've said no to as the things that they've said yes to. And so if you want to have more focus, thus if you want to make more progress towards your future self, then you want to start saying no to more things, removing more friction, internal and external. Remove those lesser goals, remove even amazing things that you thought you should do, but if you said no to those things, you'd have more skin in the game on what you ultimately want. This is how you live a life of focus. Focus is about transformation. It's about deep work, not shallow work. It's about doing a few things extremely well, not doing many things in an unmeasured way. It's about being measured and deliberate practice, about getting better every week, about doing less but better every single week and focusing on massive transformation rather than just habitually doing more and more and more. Please like this video, please subscribe, and if you haven't done it yet, please grab 10X is Easier Than 2X, my third book with Dan Sullivan, as well as Be Your Future Self Now. Have an amazing day. See ya.